This example has us find the first two natural frequencies of a fixed pin beam that is in transverse oscillation. This example is going to be very similar to the previous one, and we can recycle a lot of the work and almost all of the code that we already did in the first example. The only difference is going to be the changing of one of our boundary conditions from the fixed free end to this fixed pinned end. So looking at our model, again, I'll just display it using only 3 elements, and then we'll generalize it when we start looking at the code. The model is going to look identical. Here with 3 elements, we have 8 degrees of freedom illustrated, and then the mapping for the 3 elements, but that, again, pattern is going to continue as we add more elements to this, so that we know exactly where to be putting the local mass and stiffness matrices. So all that's going to be exactly the same as it was in the previous version of this. The only thing that we do have to think about that's going to be different are the boundary conditions. So from the picture, W1, W2, those are still going to be always 0. There is still that wall connection at the left-hand side, which means that W1, W2 are 0. Even as we keep adding more and more elements, still the first 2 are always going to be at the wall, always going to be 0. In our picture, though, we're going to have a third boundary condition we need to enforce, because now the right end is not free, where the internal bending was 0, the internal shear was 0, which we didn't have to account for in the FEA code, but the displacement is going to be 0 at all times at the end. And then the moment is going to be 0, but again, we don't need to enforce that. So there's actually a third thing we need to enforce, and looking at our small scale image, when we have only 3 elements, it's going to be W7 is going to be 0. But this is where in the code we do need to think about a little bit, is it how to code that in. When there's 3 elements, yes, it is going to be W7 that is always going to be set to 0. But what happens here if I add a 4th element into the picture? Well, now we are going to be adding 2 more nodes. We're going to have a W9 and a W10. But if I always say that W7 is 0, that's no longer true once I have a 4th element, and then the 5th, a 6th, and so on. So I can't just hard code it in there that it's always the 7th one. Now, W1, W2, that's true. The 1st and 2nd are always 0. But it's not always the 7th one that's 0. But what we're going to see is it's always going to be really the second to the last one. So since W8 is an angle, and that can be non-zero, but W7 in this one is the displacement, but the second to last one in general. So W of, I will say like n minus 1 is really in general what we're going to be setting to 0. And we'll see what that looks like in the code, but that way as we scale this up and add more elements, we're always eliminating or zeroing out the correct degree of freedom. That's always the displacement at the end of the beam. So what is this going to do? That means that we are going to also eliminate the second to last column and second to last row in K, second to last row, second to last column in M will be eliminated from our matrices, from those global matrices. So 3 rows, 3 columns eliminated from each to enforce these boundary conditions. And again, that's really the only change between this problem and the fixed free version of it. Going into the code, if we compare this to what we saw for the first example, everything looks identical, and the process is completely identical as to what we did in the fixed free version. So it's really only differences down here in 50 and 51 where we see the one difference in the code, and that is in enforcing these boundary conditions. So if we look what I'm doing with K, I'm assembling the global K matrix as before, but now I'm enforcing my boundary conditions. So like in the previous one, I want to skip over row 1 and 2 and columns 1 and 2. So that's why I'm going to reduce this by starting at the 3rd row and 3rd column. But then I don't want to take all the way to the end because I need to eliminate the next to last row and column. So if we see what I do here is I want to keep the 3rd through the end minus 2, which is actually the 3rd from the end, since end is the last index, and then n minus 1 will be the second to last, n minus 2 will actually be the 3rd to last. So what I'm doing is I'm keeping the 3rd through the 3rd to last, and then I'm going to be skipping over the next to last or the second to last, and then I am keeping the last one. So let's just see what this looks like for our small scale to make sure it's doing it correctly. So I'm going to do this for just the 3 elements like I have in the picture. And I need to run everything through here. So I'll set JJ equal to 2. That should be 3 elements since I am starting at, I'm starting at 1. Okay, so 3 elements here. Let's see what this looks like. All right, so at the end of this assembly, if I look at my K and my M, these should all be the correct sizes, and they are 8 by 8, because with 3 elements, I have those 8 degrees of freedom. Now I'm going to apply my boundary conditions. So what we should see is if it's doing it right, we should be eliminating first and second row. So this 244 should be gone, this 22.9 should be gone from it. So we should be starting down here at 488 in the upper left. And we should be eliminating this column and this row. So this 84.5537 should be gone as well. So let's just make sure that this did it correctly. It should be eliminating 3 rows, 3 columns. Right, so this is what we have left. So notice if I scroll up, first row, first column, second row, second column, gone. It starts at that 488 like we have here. And now let's make sure that this row and column are gone. Yeah, it skips over, it goes from the negative 2.09 to the 2.78, and it skipped over that negative 22.96. So that next to last row, next to last column were eliminated, which is enforcing that displacement boundary condition. And again, looking at the size, now they're only 5 by 5 matrices since it was 8 by 8, and we took away 3 of those due to our 3 displacement or slope boundary conditions. So boundary conditions are enforced. Now we can run the whole thing and see what the results are. Okay, and it has run, and we can look at the convergence. Once again, we see pretty quickly that our natural frequencies are converging. After, again, for the omega 1, maybe around 10 elements or so, it's basically flat. And for omega 2, we see that it comes down, and by 15 or so elements, it also is flat. Both of them have converged. This is another case where we did this problem analytically, so we have true or known results to compare this to. Going back to the analytic solution, we were able to solve because our area and moment of inertia were constant, our Young's modulus, our density were constant, and it was in free vibration. We were able to go through the steps here to find the beta values from the boundary conditions and then translate to the natural frequencies. So in the previous example, we looked at the first 4 natural frequencies, although we could have found as many as we wanted. Let's just look at the first 2 to compare it to what we have from the finite element solution. So our lowest natural frequency we found was 1950 radians per second, and then the second was 6300. These were rounded a little bit because, again, beta was a little bit of an estimate since we found it using F0. So I did round these off a little bit. I have more precise values in the code, though. But we're comparing what we got from the FEA to the 1950 for the first omega, 6300 about for the second omega. So here, see here for omega 1, I am dividing it by, it has a little bit more precision than I wrote in the previous example, but it's very close to what we had. And then we have here the 6300 about, but with a little bit more precision than what we had previously. So I can get a little bit more of a correspondence. What do we get from the FEA versus what we're considering the true value from the analytic approach. So rerunning this, again, we're converging, that the FEA and the analytic are converging very, very close to 1, meaning the number we get out of the FEA is matching pretty closely, or by the end here, very closely to what we got from the analytic. So we are seeing convergence, and it's converging to what we have accepted as the correct answer.